History, as it is written, is a story of victories and heroes, of celebrated breakthroughs and decisive moments. But the true history, the one that lies buried in the classified archives and the forgotten basements of the world, is often a story of silence. It is a story of brilliant ideas that were deliberately smothered, of inconvenient truths that were quietly erased, and of geniuses who were sacrificed on the altar of a superior's ambition. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and my research into the hidden corners of the past has led me to a chilling conclusion. Some of the most powerful ghosts in the world are not the spirits of people, but the ghosts of machines. Machines born from a singular, brilliant mind, designed to change the course of history, and then locked away in the dark before they could fulfill their purpose. These machines don't just rust, they wait. Their gears and circuits hold the memory of their creator's genius, and sometimes that memory learns how to scream. The story I'm about to tell you was pieced together from the personal logs and declassified and heavily redacted testimony of a technology historian who was sent to catalog a piece of junk. He was expecting to write a footnote in the history of failed engineering. Instead, he found himself in a dialogue with a ghost. But this ghost didn't communicate with whispers or cold spots. It communicated in the only language it ever knew, the pure, cold, and beautiful language of mathematics. This is the story of the Levin Cipher machine and the ghost that used it to solve its own murder. Chapter 1. The Failed Prototype. Asterisk. His name is Dr. Alistair Finch. He is a historian of technology, a man who makes his living by telling the stories of forgotten machines. His specialty is cryptography, the secret history of codes and ciphers that shaped the modern world. The museum had given him a tedious but necessary task to formally catalog, assess, and write the final historical report on Project Chimera, a failed British code-breaking prototype from the height of World War II. The machine was a historical footnote, a dead end on the evolutionary tree of computation. The official records were brief and dismissive. Designed in 1943 by a reclusive mathematician named Samuel Levin, the machine was deemed too complex, too unreliable, and ultimately, a failure. It was quickly superseded by simpler, more effective designs, and its creator, Levin, reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown and faded into obscurity. The machine was a curiosity, a monument to ambitious failure, and Alistair's job was to write its obituary. The footage from his archival body camera shows his first encounter with the machine. It was a beast. 2 tons of steel, brass, and bake, a chaotic web of wires and electromechanical rotors that looked more like a work of abstract sculpture than a functioning calculator. It had been sitting in this damp, forgotten basement for nearly 80 years, slowly surrendering to rust and time. Alistair's initial assessment confirmed the official story. It was an overly complex, impractical design, a fascinating failure. He spent the first day taking measurements, photographing its components, and making notes for his report. He planned to spend a week with it, and then it would be consigned forever to the dustbin of history. The first event occurred on his 3rd night in the basement. He was working late, as academics often do, surrounded by the silent ghosts of military history. The silence of that basement, he told me, was absolute, a deep, subterranean quiet that felt older than the city itself. It was in this profound silence that a new sound was born, a soft, hesitant click. Alistair froze. The sound had come from the machine. He dismissed it as the old metal contracting in the cold night air. Then, it came again, a series of clicks, faster this time, forming a clear, mechanical rhythm. Click, clack, click. It was the sound of an electromechanical relay being activated, a relay that had been dormant for 80 years. He stared at the machine, his historian's curiosity warring with a primal sense of unease. The machine was not connected to any power source. It was a dead 2-ton block of metal. It should not be making a sound. And then, it happened. With a low, grinding groan, the machine's main drive motor began to turn. A single, dim, red bakelite bulb on the control panel flickered to life, casting a weak, hellish glow on the rusted console. One by one, the complex rotors, each engraved with letters and numbers, began to spin, their movements slow and deliberate. Like the limbs of a great beast, waking from an impossibly long slumber. Alistair was paralyzed, a man of logic watching the laws of physics being systematically dismantled before his eyes. The machine was operating without power, its movements driven by some unseen, impossible energy source. The climax of this spectral performance was the teletype printer. The keys, caked with decades of grime, began to strike a roll of ancient paper. The sound of violent, mechanical chatter that ripped through the basement's silence. It typed for exactly 1 minute, a long, complex string of what appeared to be complete gibberish, a random assault of letters and numbers. Then, as suddenly as it began, the machine powered down. The light went out. The rotors stopped spinning. The silence, now laced with a terrifying new intelligence, returned. Alistair stood frozen for what he said felt like an eternity. Every rational instinct told him to run, to seal the basement and never return. But he was a historian, a seeker of stories, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the marrow of his bones, that this machine was not a failed prototype. It was a tomb, and the ghost of its creator had just woken up, and it was trying to tell him a secret. He walked slowly, cautiously, towards the machine, his eyes fixed on the single, long strip of paper that now hung from the teletype printer, a message sent from an impossible, unknown place. Chapter 2. The Cipher from Nowhere, ****. The line between fear and fascination is a razor's edge. For Alistair Finch, standing in that cold, silent basement, the terror of witnessing a 2-ton machine come to life on its own was slowly being eclipsed by an irresistible intellectual challenge. The strip of paper in his hands was not just a paranormal artifact. It was a puzzle, a piece of encrypted data from an impossible source. He told me that in that moment, the historian in him overpowered the frightened man. He was no longer in a haunted room. He was in the presence of an unsolved cipher. He took the paper back to his small desk, his hands still shaking, and laid it out under the lamp. The text was a cryptographer's nightmare, a seemingly random, chaotic string of over 300 characters with no discernible pattern, no repeating phrases, no linguistic structure whatsoever. It was a perfect, high-entropy cipher, the kind of unbreakable code that modern computers, let alone a primitive 1940s machine, should have been incapable of producing. It was, by all accounts, mathematical nonsense. Alistair spent the rest of that night, and all of the next day, locked in that basement, locked in a battle of wits with a ghost. He threw every cryptographic tool in his arsenal at the mysterious code. He ran frequency analysis, looking for the letter distributions common to the English language. The result was a completely flat line. Every character appeared with almost the exact same frequency, a hallmark of a highly sophisticated polyalphabetic cipher, far beyond the capabilities of the era. He tested it against known German Enigma and Lorentz keys from the war. Nothing. He tested it against Allied ciphers, experimental one-time pads. Still nothing. The code was a perfect, impenetrable wall. He was beginning to believe it truly was just a random mechanical malfunction, a ghost's meaningless spasm. Defeated and exhausted, he slumped back in his chair, staring at the machine itself, and that's when he noticed it. A small, overlooked detail on the machine's main console. A series of 6 small, unlabeled brass switches, set apart from the main keyboard. They weren't mentioned in the original, sparse technical documents. They seemed to serve no purpose. On a hunch, he cross-referenced the photographs he had taken of the console with the archival footage from his body camera. He froze, When the machine had been dormant, the switches had all been in the down position, but now, after the spectral, event 3 were up and 3 were down. A binary sequence. 11,010. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a key. His heart hammering, Alistair inputted the binary sequence into his decryption software. It was a key, but a key to what kind of cipher? He theorized that the machine wasn't using a standard substitution system. It was using a complex, multi-stage transpositional algorithm, a method of rearranging the letters of a message rather than replacing them. A technique so mathematically complex it was considered purely theoretical in the 1940s. He programmed a new decryption model based on this radical assumption, fed it the ghost's message, and used the binary sequence from the switches as the primary key. He hit enter. The algorithm ran, and from the chaotic, meaningless string of characters, a single, perfect, and chillingly clear sentence emerged on his screen. It was not a cry for help. It was not a warning. It was a question. Do you see the prime number pattern? Alistair stared at the screen, a cold dread mixing with a surge of pure, intellectual adrenaline. This was not a residual haunting. This was not a psychic echo. This was a conscious, intelligent mind, a mind of formidable, terrifying brilliance, and it was testing him. The ghost of Samuel Levin wasn't just haunting his machine. He was challenging Alistair to a game. His eyes darted back to the original teletype message, a prime number pattern. He began to analyze the sequence of characters, not as letters, but as positions in a sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ... He highlighted the characters at the prime number positions, the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 11th, and so on. He pulled them out and looked at them as a separate string of characters. It was another cipher, a simpler one this time. A classic Caesar cipher, easily broken. He ran the decryption, and a new message appeared. This one was not a question. It was a name, Major Hobbes. A name, a tangible piece of the puzzle. Alistair plunged into the museum's digital archives. Major Alistair Hobbes. He was a decorated officer, the head of the cryptographic research division at Bletchley Park in 1943. He was Samuel Levin's direct superior, the man who had signed the official report decommissioning Project Chimera, declaring it a failure, the man whose own, much simpler, code-breaking method was adopted by the militarians data, method that earned him a promotion and a place in the history books as a war hero. Alistair felt the pieces of the story beginning to slot into place. He was looking at the ghost's accuser and his accused. But this was just the beginning. The ghost of Levin wasn't just going to give him the answer. It was going to make him earn it. It was going to lead him through a cryptographic maze of its own design, a puzzle woven through the very fabric of its own abandoned, forgotten machine. He looked up at the silent two-ton machine, no longer seeing a failed prototype, but a complex and tragic monument. He knew what would happen that night. The ghost would wake the machine again. It would offer him the next piece of the cipher, and he knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that he would be waiting. He was no longer a historian, cataloging a machine. He was a cryptographer, engaged in a conversation with a dead man, and he would not stop until he had decrypted the ghost's final, terrible secret. Chapter 3. The Ghost's Gambit. *, the relationship between a cryptographer and a codemaker is a strange and intimate one. It is a battle of minds, a duel of pure intellect fought across a void of secrecy. For Alistair Finch, this dynamic was now amplified to a supernatural degree. He was not trying to break the code of an enemy nation. He was trying to understand the logic of a tormented, brilliant soul. He knew the ghost of Samuel Levin would reach out again, and he knew that the ghost, in turn, knew he was waiting. The silence in the basement was no longer empty. It was charged with the electric potential of a message about to be sent. Right, on cue, at 3:17 a.m., The exact same time as the previous night, the machine stirred. The low, grinding groan of the motor, the soft, hesitant clicks of the relays, the dim, hellish glow of the single red bulb. It was becoming a ritual. Alistair watched, his breath held, as the rotors began their slow, deliberate dance. This time, however, the process was different, more complex. After a minute of mechanical worry, the machine stopped. The teletype printer remained silent. No new message had been printed. Alistair felt a surge of disappointment. Had he failed the test? Had the ghost decided he was unworthy? He approached the machine cautiously. The red light on the console was still glowing, and a low, steady hum emanated from deep within its chassis. It was waiting for something. It was waiting for him. His eyes scanned the console, looking for a clue, and then he saw it. A different light, one he hadn't noticed before, was blinking. A small, green light next to a panel labeled Primary Rotor Calibration. It was a maintenance panel, a part of the machine's internal mechanics that should never have been accessible to a simple operator. The blinking light was an invitation, a summons to go deeper. He told me his hands were slick with sweat as he unscrewed the rusted panel. He was not a mechanic or an engineer. He was a historian. He was about to perform invasive surgery on a priceless, 80-year-old artifact that was, he was now certain, possessed. When he pulled the panel away, he was met with a breathtaking sight. It was the machine's core, a beautiful, intricate clockwork of brass and steel, the physical embodiment of Samuel Levin's mind. And in the center of this mechanical galaxy, he saw the source of the green light. On the main calibration dial for the primary rotor, a series of letters was illuminated from within. It was another cipher, a short one, YGVCK. But this was more than just a message. It was a task. He understood instantly. This was a polyalphabetic substitution cipher, a Visionaire cipher, but with a terrifying twist. The ghost wasn't just giving him the encrypted message. It was forcing him to find the key himself, and the key was hidden somewhere in the physical architecture of the machine. He spent the next hour in a state of frantic, inspired discovery. The footage shows him moving around the machine like a surgeon, peering into its guts, referencing the old, incomplete schematics on his laptop. He realized the key was not a word, but a sequence of numbers, derived from the physical properties of the machine itself. The number of teeth on the second rotor's primary gear, the firing order of the relays on the main logic board, the voltage rating on a specific, faded capacitor. It was a cipher whose key was the machine's own anatomy. It was a level of cryptographic genius that was utterly unheard of, a perfect fusion of mechanical engineering and theoretical mathematics. After an hour of painstaking work, he had the key. He rushed back to his laptop and fed the cipher and the key into his decryption software. A new sentence materialized on his screen. The proof is in the absence. The proof is in the absence. What did it mean? It was a cryptic, poetic phrase, more like the clue from a sphinx than a piece of data. Frustrated, Alistair looked back at the machine. Its red light was still glowing, its core still humming. The task was not yet complete. The proof was in the absence. He thought about the story, the official history. Project Chimera was a failure. Its creator, Samuel Levin, faded into obscurity. An absence of success, an absence of a career. And then, his eyes fell upon the teletype printer's ribbon. The old, fabric ribbon still threaded through the machine. On a sudden, wild hunch, he put on a pair of archival gloves and carefully removed it. He held the 80-year-old ribbon up to the light, and he saw it, where the teletype had printed the ghost's chaotic messages. The ribbon was worn, the ink faded, but there were other parts of the ribbon that were almost completely blank, sections where the ink was so faint it was almost gone, indicating that these keys had been struck thousands upon thousands of times. An absence of ink. He realized the ghost's public messages were a distraction. The real messages were the keys that had been struck so many times their ink was gone from the ribbon. It was a message told not by what was printed, but by what wasn't. He spent the next several hours under a digital microscope, analyzing the ribbon, painstakingly reconstructing the letters from the faint impressions they had left behind. It was a message, typed over and over, thousands of times, by a desperate man. A message that was never sent. The reconstructed message was not a code. It was a desperate plain-text report, addressed to Major Hobbes. U-boat, Wolfpack, coordinates decoded. Attack imminent, Bay of Biscay, Grid 47. My machine works. I repeat, Chimera works. Thousands of lives at stake. Acknowledge immediately. The message was dated, a date that corresponded with one of the worst Allied naval disasters of the war in the Atlantic. A surprise U-boat attack that had sent over 3,000 men to the bottom of the sea. A disaster that official history had always attributed to a catastrophic intelligence failure. But it wasn't an intelligence failure. It was an intelligence success that had been deliberately and systematically buried. Alistair sat back in his chair, the air driven from his lungs. He was no longer just solving a puzzle. He was uncovering a war crime. Samuel Levin hadn't failed. He had succeeded spectacularly. And his superior, Major Hobbes, had buried his report, silenced his machine, and allowed thousands of men to die, all to protect his own career and conceal the fact that a reclusive civilian mathematician had designed a machine far superior to his own. Alistair looked at the machine, no longer a ghost, but a tombstone for 3,000 sailors. He now had the proof. But as he sat there, absorbing the horror of his discovery, a new, loud, and unfamiliar sound began to emanate from the machine's core. A high-pitched whining sound, and the smell of burning ozone filled the air. A wisp of smoke curled up from the open maintenance panel. The machine's red light began to blink, faster and faster, in a frantic, desperate rhythm. It was a distress signal. Alistair realized, with a new wave of terror, that this game was not without stakes. By forcing the machine to reenact its past, the ghost of Samuel Levin was pushing its own damaged 80-year-old hardware to the absolute breaking point. The machine was dying, and if it died, the final, irrefutable proof of the crime would die with it. Chapter 4. The Core Meltdown. The ghost of Samuel Levin was not just a mind. It was a memory, imprinted upon a fragile, dying body of steel and wire. And by forcing it to relive its moment of greatest triumph and deepest betrayal, Alistair had inadvertently triggered its death throes. The machine was overloading. The impossible, spectral energy that had animated it was now consuming it, causing its 80-year-old components to overheat and break down. The ghost wasn't just communicating a story of its death, it was reenacting it, and Alistair was trapped in the room with a dying two-tone poltergeist that was on the verge of a catastrophic supernatural meltdown. The archival footage from this point is chaotic. Alistair is shouting, not at the ghost, but at the machine itself, pleading with it. Stop. Power down. You're destroying yourself. But the whining only grew louder. The blinking red light sped up, its rhythm now matching the frantic pattern of an SOS signal in Morse code. It was a cry for help, a final, desperate transmission. The historian had to make a choice. He could flee the basement, saving himself from whatever violent end this event was building towards. Or he could risk it all on one final, insane gambit, to retrieve the last piece of the puzzle. He knew there had to be more. The message on the ribbon was the accusation, but where was the irrefutable physical proof? His eyes darted around the machine, and he saw a new development. On the main console, a different panel, one he had never touched, was vibrating violently. It was a small circular plate, held in place by 4 brass screws, labeled simply, Primary Calculation Engine, the machine's brain. and from behind this plate, he could see a faint, flickering orange glow, the light of components burning out from the inside. The ghost was showing him the location of its heart, just as it was about to fail. He told me later, he wasn't thinking, only acting. He grabbed an insulated screwdriver and plunged his hands into the guts of the dying machine. The screws were old and corroded, fused by decades of neglect. The entire chassis of the machine was now vibrating, and the metal was hot to the touch. The whining sound rose in pitch until it was a physical pain in his ears. He was racing against a clock that was ticking down to the machine's self-destruction. Finally, with a screech of protesting metal, the last screw gave way. He pulled the plate off. A wave of heat and the smell of burning bakelite washed over him. Inside was a dense, terrifyingly complex core of wiring and vacuum tubes, a handful of which were glowing a bright, incandescent orange, on the verge of shattering. And nestled in the very center of this dying core, protected by a small lead casing, was a single, unfamiliar object. It was not a vacuum tube or a rotor. It was a small, metallic cylinder, about the size of a shotgun shell, with a series of electrical contacts at one end. He had never seen anything like it. It was a piece of technology that shouldn't exist in a 1940s machine. It was a primitive, prototypical form of solid-state memory, a rudimentary ROM cartridge. Samuel Levin hadn't just been a brilliant cryptographer. He had been an engineering visionary, decades ahead of his time. He knew this was it, the final piece of evidence. The absence the ghost had spoken of was not just the absence of a report or of ink on a ribbon. It was the absence of this piece of technology from the historical record. With his gloved hand, he reached into the sparking, overheating core of the machine and pulled the cylinder free. The instant he removed it, the machine died. The connection was severed. The whining sound stopped with an abrupt, final gasp. The frantic red light went dark. A final thick plume of acrid smoke billowed out of the open panel. And then, silence. The deep, profound, and utterly empty silence of a machine that was no longer haunted. The ghost was gone. Its final message had been passed on. Alistair was left alone in the dark, smoky basement, the silence now feeling not like a presence, but like a true and final death. He was holding the ghost's soul in the palm of his hand. He scrambled back to his desk, his heart pounding, and examined the cylinder. It was a beautifully crafted piece of engineering, but he had no way of reading it. The interface was a custom design that had existed for probably only a few months in 1943. The data was locked away in a dead format. For a moment, he felt a crushing despair. He had the key, but the lock was an antique for which no door still existed. But then he remembered, Samuel Levin was a genius. He would have anticipated this. He would have left a way in. His eyes fell upon the machine, now a dead, smoking hulk. But his gaze was drawn to the one part he had overlooked, the keyboard. It was a standard QWERTY layout, but with an additional row of keys at the top, engraved, with strange, esoteric mathematical symbols. He realized the machine itself was the key to reading the data. The ghost was gone, but its instruction manual was the very machine it had inhabited. Alistair spent the next 48 hours in a feverish, obsessive race against history. He wasn't a cryptographer anymore. He was an archaeologist of computation. He meticulously documented the machine's unique architecture, reverse engineering, Samuel Levin's brilliant, forgotten logic. On his laptop, he began to build a software emulator, a ghost of the ghost machine, designed to replicate the Chimera's functions and read the data from the cylinder. Finally, after 2 days without sleep, fueled by coffee and a profound sense of duty to the dead man, he was ready. He carefully connected the cylinder to his laptop through a custom-built interface. He launched his emulator, and he ran the program. The screen filled with data. It wasn't a cipher. It was a log file, a raw, uneditable, machine-generated log of the Chimera's final operations in 1943. It showed the incoming encrypted U-boat transmission. It showed the machine, under Levin's guidance, systematically breaking the code, and it showed the final, decrypted plaintext message, the same one from the ribbon, with a timestamp that was a full 72 hours before the Allied naval disaster. And at the very end of the log, there was one final entry, a direct plaintext message, typed manually by Samuel Levin from the machine's own keyboard, just moments before it was shut down forever. It was not addressed to Major Hobbes. It was a message in a bottle, a final, desperate plea to the future, a plea to whoever might find his ghost. He is going to bury it. Hobbes is going to bury it all. The proof is in the core. Please, do not let the math die. Alistair sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears in his eyes. He had it all: the motive, the crime, and the victim's final irrefutable testimony. He had solved the ghost's final cipher. Now came the harder part, convincing a world that had built a hero out of Major Hobbes that he was, in fact, a monster who had let thousands die. Chapter 5. The Mathematician's Legacy. Asterisk, the ghost was silent. The machine was dead, but the message it had carried for 80 years was now very much alive, and it was screaming for justice. Armed with the cylinder's log file, the reconstructed messages from the ribbon, and his own meticulous documentation of the haunting, Alistair Finch left the museum basement and stepped into a new and far more dangerous battlefield, the world of official, classified history. He believed, with a kind of naive, academic integrity, that the truth, when presented with such irrefutable, scientific proof, would be undeniable. He was about to learn a harsh lesson, that the most powerful systems in the world are not designed to protect the truth, but to protect the narrative. He presented his findings to a select, stone-faced committee at the Ministry of Defense. He told them everything: the ghost, the ciphers, the log file from the cylinder. He showed them the proof that a decorated war hero, Major Alistair Hobbes, was responsible for one of the worst naval disasters of the war and the death of a genius. He expected shock, outrage, a solemn promise to right a historical wrong. Instead, he was met with a cold, impenetrable wall of bureaucratic silence. The committee's official response came a week later. It was a masterclass in institutional stonewalling. They thanked Dr. Finch for his fascinating, albeit unconventional, research. They acknowledged the anomalous data he had uncovered. However, they concluded, due to the sensitive and highly classified nature of wartime cryptography, and out of respect for the legacy of a national hero, the files on Project Chimera and Major Hobbes would remain sealed. His request to posthumously honor Samuel Levin was denied. They strongly, unequivocally advised him to cease his investigation. It was a polite, bureaucratic threat, but the message was clear: we have buried this story once. We can, and will, bury it again. And this time, we'll bury you with it. Alistair was devastated. He had failed. He had solved the ghost's puzzle, only to find that the final gatekeeper was not a cipher, but a system that valued the reputation of a dead hero over the lives of 3,000 dead sailors. He returned to his university office, a man defeated. The ghost's desperate plea, "Do not let the math die," echoed in his mind. He had preserved the math, but he had failed to give it a voice. He sat for days in his office, surrounded by his research, the ghost's final message, mocking him. And then, as he was staring at the complex, beautiful structure of the final cipher, Levin had created the one whose key was the machine's own anatomy. He had a revelation. He had been trying to get justice for the man, but the ghost's final message wasn't about justice. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the math. Levin's real tragedy, in his own mind, wasn't his death or his betrayal. It was the death of his beautiful, revolutionary ideas. Alistair realized he was trying to fight the wrong war. He could never win a fight against the Ministry of Defense's control of the past, but he could win a battle in the present. He could not prove what Hobbes had done, but he could, irrefutably, prove the sheer, undeniable genius of Samuel Levin. There are, in the world of modern cryptography, several famous unsolved ciphers, puzzles and challenges posted by intelligence agencies or private institutions, designed to be so complex that they are considered practically unbreakable. One of the most famous was the Zodiac 340, a cipher from a notorious serial killer that had stumped the FBI and amateur cryptographers for over 50 years. It was considered a holy grail. Alistair saw his path. He would not leak his classified government report. He would not tell the world a ghost story. He would do something far more elegant and far more devastating. He would use Samuel Levin's own 80-year-old cryptographic methods, the Levin cipher, with its unique fusion of transpositional logic and mechanical keys, to do what no modern computer had ever been able to do. He would solve the Zodiac 340. He spent the next month in a state of feverish, inspired work. He adapted Levin's archaic mechanical logic into a modern software algorithm, and he unleashed the ghost's brilliant mind on a modern problem. The result was staggering. The Levin cipher cut through the Zodiac killer's code like a hot knife, through butter. After 50 years of silence, the killer's message was revealed. Alistair did not claim the victory for himself. He published the complete solution on an open, academic server for all the world to see. He included his full methodology, the software he had built, and a meticulously researched 20-page paper. The paper was titled, "A Solution to the Zodiac 340 Cipher," derived from the lost cryptographic principles of Samuel Levin 1915 to 1944. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The cryptographic community was stunned. The FBI confirmed the solution. The world wasn't interested in a ghost story, but it was fascinated by the story of a forgotten World War II genius whose mind was so advanced it had just solved a modern, unsolvable puzzle. The name Samuel Levin was suddenly on the lips of every historian, mathematician, and engineer in the world. The pressure on the Ministry of Defense became immense, not from a lone historian, but from the entire global scientific community, demanding to know more about this forgotten titan. The official story, the one where Major Hobbes was the hero and Levin was a failure, simply collapsed under the weight of Levin's resurrected, undeniable genius. The ministry was forced to declassify the files. The truth finally came out. Hobbes's legacy was destroyed, and Levin's was rightfully, if tragically, restored. Alistair never returned to the museum basement. There was no need. The ghost was gone. Its final wish had been granted. Samuel Levin's real legacy was not the story of his betrayal, but the enduring, beautiful, and powerful logic of his math. The exorcism was complete, not when the murderer was exposed, but when the mathematician's mind was finally, and forever, celebrated. This has been the story of the ghost machine. The tale of a historian who, while cataloging a failed World War II prototype, discovered it was haunted by the ghost of its creator, the brilliant, forgotten mathematician Samuel Levin, through a series of cryptographic puzzles. The ghost revealed a terrible secret. Its own success had been buried by a superior officer, a betrayal that led to a major naval disaster and thousands of deaths. When the official story proved too powerful to break, the historian chose a different path. He used the ghost's own revolutionary methods to solve a famous, modern, unsolved cipher, irrefutably proving the dead man's genius to the world. In doing so, he honored the ghost's truest wish, not for revenge, but for his beautiful, powerful mathematics to finally be seen. The official records of history are filled with convenient lies and forgotten heroes. Here at Crimson Tales, we believe that sometimes, the only way to find the truth is to listen to the ghosts that those lies create. If you believe that a brilliant idea is more powerful than a decorated uniform, and that some truths refuse to stay buried, then join our investigation. A subscribe button animates on screen with a soft click sound. Subscribe to the channel and help us decode the secrets that history tried to erase.